Hello, my name is Meg Jenista. I'm a PhD candidate in public theology at Fuller Theological Seminary, and my interest lies at the intersection of political imagination and discipleship and homiletical practice. Additionally, I am the program director for Preaching Reformed Fellowship out of the Center for Public Justice. I'm delighted to present my paper at EHS, and my paper is entitled The Parable of the Wise and Foolish Preachers, Decolonial Homiletics for Expository Preachers. This paper begins with a story I heard growing up about my missionary grandfather driving home after preaching one Sunday morning as the Philippine Sea crashed on the waves, as only the Philippine Sea can, and the salt air coming through the open windows, and my grandfather having one of those glorious experiences of feeling good about the sermon after preaching. He felt that he had exegeted the parable of the wise and foolish builders well, that he had communicated it clearly, and he thought that he had applied it compellingly. And then all of a sudden, something caught his eye, flashing by the open windows. One after another were the nipa huts, the traditional Philippine houses built up on stilts. And all of a sudden, my literalist interpreting inerrantist fundamentalist grandfather had a sinking feeling. How could his sermon have landed at all in a place where it's the wise man who buries the poles of his house deep in the sand, and only a foolish man would build a house on a rock? In the end of Cognitive Empire, Boaventure de Sousa Santos describes what he calls a Western way of knowing. And this way of knowing has four characteristics. First, it presumes objectivity, achieved through scientific method, substantiating claims of neutrality, resulting in epistemicide. What I attempt to do in this paper is map these categories onto our classic attempts at expository preaching, which begin in the text, using a particular method and process by which one can scientifically understand the text. And then if one has done that, then if the text is approached objectively and the truth is mined methodically, then the conclusions that we come to with our sermons about morality and politics and the way we should live in the world, well, they're neutral. They're simply what the Bible says. But this objectivity, science, neutrality loop, which can be at the heart of practices of expository preaching, map to three symptoms of what Willie James Jennings calls a diseased social imagination, or at least that's my claim in this paper. The first symptom of a diseased social imagination is what de Sousa Santos calls epistemicide, the doing away with certain ways of knowing, and therefore certain knowers. So people who refuse to step outside of or claim to step outside of their tradition or their heritage or their culture in order to exegete text objectively. Those who don't have the education it takes to engage the right process, the scientific method that we use in expository preaching. And all of a sudden, you have a whole bunch of people who aren't allowed to know in the pulpit. So that's epistemicide. The second symptom of a diseased social imagination is a deeply political neutrality. And the third symptom of a diseased social imagination is an implicit and sometimes explicit preference for an authoritarian leader who comes into the pulpit objective and scientific and neutral, and then this becomes the person who says, I alone can exegete it. And that shapes the political desires of God's people. What I'm not claiming is that this is necessarily a wrong way of knowing. It is sufficient to assert that it's an incomplete way of knowing. De Sousa Santos suggests that we engage a process of what he calls the ecology of knowledge. Three examples are corporeality, corazonar, and co-creation. And so then I map these ideas onto and suggest them as cures for diseased social imagination. And then, by way of conclusion, this paper offers a creative reinterpretation of what might have happened if corporeality, corazonar, and co-creation had been part of my grandfather's sermon some 70 years ago.